Hey y'all, this is Mr. Pepin, and for our fifth week of online math, we are going to be reviewing division with 2 and 3-digit dividends. We are going to be using the partial quotient strategy, and for those of you that don't remember, the partial quotient strategy is just a fancy way of describing our split up strategy, wherein we take a big number and then break it up into smaller pieces that are easier to work with. And today we're going to be using this split up strategy in order to solve division equations. Let's look at an example. 86 divided by 2. 86 is our dividend, the number that is being broken into smaller groups. 2 is our divisor, the number of smaller groups we are breaking 86 into. We are trying to find the quotient. So, how can we take 86, a big number, and break it down into smaller groups? Well, one way is to check the digits in each place value. Let's start here in the tens place. We have a digit of 8, which means there are 8 groups of 10. 8 groups of 10 means 80 can be one of the numbers we break 86 into. If we then look at the ones column, we see that there is a digit of 6, and 6 ones makes 6. So we are taking 86 and we are breaking it into 80 and 6, which means one of our equations is going to be 80 divided by 2, and the other one is going to be 6 divided by 2. But remember, whenever you take a big number and you split it into smaller groups, you always have to add them back up. Which means after we find 80 divided by 2, and after we find 6 divided by 2, we will have to add up their quotients. Let's try finding those quotients now. So here is the partial product box that can be used to keep track of our equations. In our class, we called it the fish tank strategy, okay? In one fish tank, we have 80, and in the other, we have 6. And as we know, we are dividing each of these numbers by 2. So let's start with 80. I'm going to write my equation right in here because I have the space to. 80 divided by 2 equals something. Now, as we know, multiplication and division are like two sides of the same coin, meaning we can always flip them around. So 80 divided by 2 equals something is the same thing as something times 2 equals 80. Gosh, Mr. Pepin, something times 2 equals 80 is not one of our math facts. Yes, that's right. But what if we cover up the 0? If we cover up the 0, we are left with something times 2 equals 8. If we go to our math facts and we skip count by 2, 2, 4, 6, 8, we know that 4 times 2 equals 8. And now that we found that, all we have to do is add back the 0. In other words, 80 divided by 2 equals 40. We can write it inside the box, and then we can write it underneath. 40 is one of our partial quotients. Next, we have 6 divided by 2 equals something. And like we said, multiplication and division, two sides of the same coin. You can always flip them around. Something times 2 equals 6. And if we skip count 2, 4, 6, we know that that mystery number is 3. 3 groups of 2. Which means 6 divided by 2 equals 3. And finally, like we said earlier, in order to find our quotient, we took 86 and we broke it down into 80 and 6. But if you break apart a big number, you always have to add back up the pieces. So we are left with 40 plus 3 equals 43. That is our quotient for 86 divided by 2. If we go back to our assignment, the first part or the first task, the quotient has already been broken down into smaller groups for you to solve. All you have to do is fill in the empty boxes. Same thing for slide 4 and 5. Once you get to slide 7, though, you are going to be working with 3-digit dividends. That means now we have a hundreds place. Just because a number is bigger does not mean our steps change. So let's look at an example. 484 divided by 4. Just because it's a big number doesn't mean our steps change. So let's take it place value by place value. There's a 4 in the hundreds place. 4 groups of 100 makes 400. One of our groups is going to be 400. There's an 8 in the tens place. 8 groups of 10, which makes 80. And then there's a 4 in the ones place. 4 groups of 1 makes 4, which means we have split 484 into 480 and 4. After we find our partial quotients, we will add them back up. Here is our box. So let's start with, in my opinion, one of the easiest parts. 400 divided by 4. Like we talked about earlier, multiplication and division, two sides of the same coin, which means you can always flip them around. 400 divided by 4 equals something is the same thing as something times 4 equals 400. 400 is a big number, but since it has those zeros, we can always just cover them up. So let's go ahead and do that. Something times 4 equals 4. Well, any number times 1 always equals that same number. 1 times 4 equals 4. Afterwards, we simply add back the two zeros. So we are left with 100 times 4 equals 400, or 400 divided by 4 equals 100. This is going to be one of the problems in your first task. I will leave it up to you to find the other two boxes, or partial quotients. If we go back to our assignment, you'll see that slides 7 and 8 contain 3-digit dividends, okay? Part 2 of your task is going to be a math story, and I recommend you take this in 3 steps. Step 1, identify who our main character, David, what our main character, David, is buying. He is buying 6 cameras. Look closely, not just one camera, 6. Each of these cameras cost $85. Look closely. It did not say David pays $85 for 6 cameras. It said David buys 6 cameras and each of them is $85. Afterwards, the last step, see how many equal groups you are going to be splitting 6 cameras, each worth $85, into. In this case, you are going to be splitting the cost of the cameras into 5 equal payments. If you are taking a big number and you are splitting it into equal groups, what operation are you going to be using? This is a multi-step problem, and just a little hint, it will involve multiple operations. Okay, moving on. The last part of your assignment is just going to be a wrap-up where the boxes in your partial quotient model are not filled in. It's going to be up to you to fill them in and then solve through. You're going to have a 2-digit dividend example and a 3-digit dividend example. So that is the partial quotient strategy. However, we touched on this a little bit before spring break. If you preferred that standard algorithm that we used, here is a video for you to review on the very last slide. If instead of the partial quotient strategy, you would like to use the standard division algorithm. Well, that's all, class. When you are done with all the slides, make sure you mark the assignment as done and then turn it in to Google Classroom. Good luck.